The police academy was silent as Officer Marcus walked down the long, cold hallway of the K-9 training center. He wasn't there to find a pet, he was there to find a partner, a warrior. But as he passed the final row of cages, something stopped him cold. It wasn't a fierce, snarling guard dog. It was Rex, a tiny, trembling German Shepherd puppy. As Marcus approached, something went wrong. Rex didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark playfully. Instead, the puppy lunged forward, sinking his tiny teeth into Marcus's heavy tactical boot, growling with a raw, desperate ferocity that stunned everyone in the room. The shelter staff gasped, rushing to pull the aggressive pup away. "He's the wrong choice, officer," they warned, their voices cold. "He's broken." Marcus looked down at the tiny, shivering creature and felt a chilling vibration in his soul. He didn't see aggression. He saw a frantic warning. Little did Marcus know, Rex hadn't chosen the wrong officer. He had sensed a dark shadow following Marcus that no human eye could ever see. And what happened just a few days later will shatter your heart and shock you to your core. If you're ready for a story that stays with you long after the screen goes dark, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. But before we begin, I want to know who I'm talking to. Drop a comment with your city or country. I love knowing exactly where in the world our paths are crossing right now. The heavy iron door of the Riverside Animal Shelter creaked open with a lonely, piercing groan. Officer Marcus walked with a stiffness that spoke of 15 painful years on the force. Years filled with high-speed chases, dangerous busts, and the silent, loyal companionship of his recently retired K-9 partner, Cooper. The station felt empty now, and Marcus's home felt even quieter, echoing with the ghost of paws that were no longer there. He wasn't here for a cuddly companion to sit on a sofa. He was here to find a trainee, a dog with the grit and instinct to handle the shadows of the city. The shelter was a deafening cacophony of sound, howls of pure anxiety and high-pitched yaps begging for a single scrap of attention. But Marcus kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, his heart locked away. He passed dozens of cages until he reached the very end of the hall, where the light barely reached. There, huddled in the cold shadows of a concrete corner, sat a small German Shepherd, Puppy. He was smaller than his litter mates, with one fragile ear that refused to stand up and fur the color of burnt charcoal. His name tag simply read, Rex. As Marcus knelt, offering a closed fist for the pup to sniff, the atmosphere in the hallway shifted instantly, turning heavy and thick. Rex didn't cower, and he certainly didn't wag his tail. Instead, his dark, piercing eyes fixed onto Marcus with an intensity that felt eerily, hauntingly human. In a flash, the puppy lunged. There was no playful nip. Rex let out a guttural, soul-shaking growl and clamped his tiny, needle-sharp teeth onto the thick leather of Marcus's boot, shaking his head with a terrifying ferocity that stunned the nearby staff into a horrified silence. "Rex! No!" a shelter volunteer cried out, rushing over to pry the trembling puppy away. She looked at Marcus, her face flushed with deep embarrassment. "I am so sorry, officer. He's been like this with everyone. We've tried to socialize him, but he's unpredictable. He's clearly the wrong choice for police work. We have a much calmer, friendlier lab down the hall." Marcus didn't move. He looked down at his scuffed boot and then back at the tiny, misunderstood creature now pinned behind the volunteer's arms. Everyone saw a broken dog, a failure of a protector. But Marcus saw something else entirely. He saw a dog that wasn't afraid of a man in uniform. He saw a dog that was trying to communicate something with a desperation that bordered on absolute panic. The experts called him a mistake, but as Marcus locked eyes with Rex, he felt a strange, cold shiver crawl down his spine. He wasn't leaving without that puppy. Against every piece of professional advice, Marcus signed the adoption papers with a steady hand. The shelter staff watched in judgmental silence as he carried the small, rigid puppy to his cruiser. They whispered that it was a waste of time, that a dog who starts with aggression ends as a lethal liability. But Marcus had spent his life trusting his gut, and right now, his gut was screaming that Rex was special. However, the moment they crossed the threshold of Marcus's home, the special connection felt like a heart-wrenching disaster. The first week was a grueling, sleepless test of patience. While most puppies spend their first days exploring and napping, Rex was a frantic ball of nervous, vibrating energy. He refused to touch his food, his ribs beginning to show painfully beneath his dark fur. But it wasn't just the lack of appetite. It was the haunting behavior. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house grew quiet and lonely, Rex would begin his ritual. He would stand at the entrance of Marcus's bedroom, his hackles raised, letting out a low, continuous whine that eventually escalated into a sharp, repetitive bark that sounded like a scream for help. Marcus tried everything. He checked for intruders, searched for pests behind the drywall, and even changed the air filters thinking the pup smelled something offensive. Nothing worked. Rex's gaze remained locked onto a specific corner of the room, his small body trembling as if he were staring at a ghost. Marcus began to doubt himself, his heart heavy with regret. Had he let sentimentality cloud his judgment? Was Rex actually suffering from a neurological glitch that made him perceive threats that didn't exist? One night, exhausted from a double shift and near a breaking point, Marcus tried to pull Rex away from the door to get some sleep. The moment his hand touched the puppy's collar, Rex spun around and snapped at Marcus's wrist, his eyes wide with a terrifying, wild desperation. Marcus sat back on the floor, his heart racing against his ribs. He looked at the tiny dog and then at the empty corner of the room. To any outsider, the wrong choice had been confirmed. Rex was a broken, aggressive dog that belonged back in a cage, but as Marcus watched, the puppy returned to his post, guarding a doorway against an invisible enemy. He realized Rex wasn't trying to be the boss. He was terrified for Marcus. The question was, what did a 10-week-old puppy know that a veteran detective was too blind to see? The following Monday, Marcus took Rex to the training grounds, hoping that a structured environment would finally break the cycle of chaos. He desperately wanted to see the legendary German Shepherd Focus, the drive that makes them the gold standard of K9 units. Instead, he got more of the same erratic behavior. While the other trainee pups were busy chasing tennis balls or learning to sit, Rex remained tethered to Marcus's side, his nose constantly prodding at Marcus's left thigh with an anxious, wet heat, his breathing heavy and strained. During a light jog meant to test the dog's gait, Rex suddenly veered in front of Marcus, tripping him. As Marcus scrambled to his feet, frustrated, red-faced, and embarrassed, Rex lunged, again nipping at his hand with that same startling, desperate ferocity from the shelter. A fellow officer nearby shook his head with a pitying look. "Marcus, let it go, man. That dog is a liability. He's going to turn on you when it matters most." For a split second, Marcus almost agreed. The frustration was a physical weight in his chest, a tightening, suffocating sensation he'd been feeling more and more lately. But then, Marcus noticed something that changed his world forever. He paused to catch his breath, leaning heavily against a fence, and watched Rex closely. The puppy wasn't looking at the other dogs. He wasn't looking at the trainers. He was staring directly at Marcus's chest, his head tilting back and forth as if he were listening to a broken rhythm only he could hear. Marcus pulled out his tactical watch to check his heart rate. It was 130 beats per minute, unusually, dangerously high for a light jog. He sat down on a bench and immediately Rex calmed, the tension leaving his tiny frame. The puppy rested his chin on Marcus's knee, letting out a long, relieved sigh that broke Marcus's heart. Marcus realized a chilling, beautiful pattern. Rex's attacks only happened when Marcus's heart began to race. The barking at the bedroom corner, the nipping during training, the tripping, it wasn't aggression. It was a frantic, loving intervention. Rex wasn't a bad dog. He was a mirror, reflecting a storm brewing inside Marcus's own body that Marcus had been too proud and too stubborn to acknowledge. The puppy wasn't failing the training. He was trying to tell Marcus that he was the one who was failing his own life. The tension reached its breaking point on a humid, heavy Thursday evening. Marcus was at his locker, pulling on his heavy ballistic vest and checking his service weapon. The precinct was buzzing with adrenaline. They were minutes away from executing a high-stakes raid on a suspected smuggling warehouse. This was the kind of mission Marcus lived for, the high-pressure environment where his experience usually shone. But as he reached for his tactical belt, Rex, who had been uncharacteristically quiet in the corner, suddenly exploded into a frenzy of pure panic. The puppy didn't just bark, he threw his entire small body against the locker room door, physically blocking Marcus's exit. When Marcus tried to gently nudge him aside with his boot, Rex did something unthinkable. He lunged forward and snatched Marcus's car keys right off the bench, darting under a heavy metal table. "Rex, drop it. I don't have time for this," Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the tile walls with a harshness that made the puppy flinch. He felt a familiar, sharp, stabbing pressure blooming behind his ribs, a tightness he'd dismissed for weeks as mere stress or indigestion. As Marcus bent down to retrieve the keys, Rex didn't retreat. He dropped the keys and sat on them, baring his teeth in a way that wasn't a threat but a heartbroken, desperate plea. Marcus felt his temper flare, his face flushing a deep, dangerous crimson. He stepped forward to grab the pup, but his legs suddenly felt like lead, heavy and useless. The room began to spin, the fluorescent lights blurring into long, jagged streaks of blinding white. He reached for the table to steady himself, but his hand missed the edge, grasping at thin air. In that terrifying moment of absolute silence, the wrong dog's behavior finally made sense. As Marcus slumped against the lockers, clutching his chest in agony, he realized the shadow Rex had been chasing wasn't a ghost. It was a silent killer living inside him. The puppy hadn't been attacking Marcus. He had been trying, with everything he had, to keep him from walking into a situation where the physical exertion of a raid would have caused his heart to stop forever. Rex wasn't a K9 trainee. He was a guardian who had detected an undiagnosed, life-threatening cardiac blockage before a single doctor could. The aggression was the only language a tiny puppy had to save his partner's life. The world went dark as Marcus hit the cold floor, the heavy thud of his tactical vest echoing like a final drumbeat in the empty locker room. He was gasping, but the air wouldn't come. It felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing his heart with an iron, unforgiving grip. Under the table, Rex didn't hesitate. The puppy abandoned the keys and scrambled toward Marcus, his small paws skidding on the linoleum in a rush of love. He didn't bark this time. He acted. With a precision that defied his age and lack of formal training, Rex began to lick Marcus's face frantically, crying and whining, trying with all his might to keep him conscious. But the puppy knew he couldn't do this alone. Rex looked at the heavy door, then back at Marcus's slumped, lifeless form. In a moment of pure, divine instinct, the dog lunged for the tactical radio clipped to Marcus's shoulder. He didn't know what it was, but he had seen Marcus speak into it 1,000 times. Rex's teeth clamped down on the orange emergency button, his small weight pulling it until a loud, piercing, life-saving tone erupted from the device. At the main desk, the dispatcher's eyes widened as the "Officer Down" signal flashed across her screen in a blur of red. Minutes later, the door burst open. Medics flooded the room, finding the aggressive puppy standing guard over Marcus's chest, his tiny body trembling with exhaustion, but his stance firm and protective. He only moved when he saw the familiar, tear-filled faces of the precinct team. As they loaded Marcus onto the gurney, the lead medic's face was grim and pale. "His heart is in a lethal rhythm," he whispered into his headset, his voice shaking. "If that dog hadn't triggered the alarm when he did, we would be looking at a body, not a patient. The wrong dog had just pulled off the most important rescue of his life. 3 weeks later, the sterile, lonely smell of the hospital had finally faded, replaced by the warm, familiar scent of home. Marcus sat on his porch, the sunset casting a golden, peaceful glow over the garden. He looked down at the fresh scar on his chest, a permanent reminder of the surgery that had saved his life. The doctors had been clear. The silent rupture in his artery would have been fatal within minutes of the raid's start. He wasn't alive because of medical science alone. He was alive because of a 10-pound puppy that everyone else had wanted to give up on. Rex sat at his feet, no longer frantic or aggressive. The puppy's ears were both standing tall and proud, now, and his eyes were calm, reflecting a deep, unshakable peace. He had fulfilled the mission he was born for. Soon, Rex would return to the academy, but not as a standard patrol dog. He was being fast-tracked for a specialized role in medical alert and search and rescue, the youngest K-9 in the department's history to receive a formal commendation for bravery. Marcus reached down, his fingers sinking into Rex's thick, warm fur. The station had thrown a small ceremony, and a nurse had even left a note saying that Rex was Marcus's guardian angel in fur. But Marcus knew it was deeper than that. They were a team. He had gone to the shelter to save a dog, but in the end, the dog was the one who saved him from the dark. Sometimes, life doesn't give you the partner you want. It gives you the one you need, the one who sees the shadows you're too blind to face. As Rex let out a contented, happy sigh and leaned his weight against Marcus's leg, the veteran officer finally understood. The puppy hadn't chosen the wrong officer. He had chosen the only one who could finally hear his warning,